Hey, how's it going today, everyone? So, I have some very exciting news because Resident Evil 3 Remake and Resident Evil Resistance have been leaked. Now, as far as Resident Evil Resistance goes, we knew that as Project Resistance, but we did not know that Resident Evil 3 Remake was actually in the works. But thanks to the leaks, we now know that it is a thing. So today I want to go off the cuff again, kind of do an impromptu video and just kind of talk about my thoughts, the initial impressions that I had, some of the things that I noticed within the promo images that have been leaked, and also some of my concerns for the gameplay and story of Resident Evil 3 Remake. But that all said, let's get right into it. So to talk about my initial impressions of the redesigns, first off, I'm going to say that in terms of how they look, I don't necessarily think they look bad. I did think Jill's in particular looked bad initially until I saw another image where you get a better look of her face, and I think it's just more so the angle within the promotional art that they have that just kind of makes it look weird. I know for whatever reason, to me at least, it just felt like she looked like an older version of Natalia from Resident Evil Revelations 2, and ironically, or maybe coincidentally, the community thought that she kind of looked like a discount Natalie Portman. So, I mean, they both have a similar name, I guess. So I don't know where I'm going with this. Like I said, initially I thought it was bad just because of the angle from the promotional material, if I could speak today. But looking at another leaked image that shows a better view, I thought that her face looked fine. I don't think it looks as bad as I had initially thought. Granted, do I think that they could have picked a better likeness that was maybe closer to how Julia Voth looked in the first Resident Evil remake? Yes, but beggars can't be choosers, and I would rather have this Resident Evil 3 remake with some quality content as opposed to just bitching about how the face looks like and saying that I'm going to boycott this game because the face of one of my favorite characters doesn't look right. So I'm more concerned about how they handle like the storytelling and stuff like that, but we'll get into that momentarily. Nemesis, I think really my only problem is the nose, because I think design-wise, it makes sense to have him look very grotesque looking, so that I don't necessarily mind, and I do like that they seem to have given him like bits of flesh that are like peeling off, and I thought that looked pretty cool, and I also think that the redesign to the teeth looked cool. But as far as the nose goes, like, yeah, I don't like it, but at the same time, I had to stop myself as far as like critiquing like the visual redesign for Nemesis, because I know that as far as that goes, one of the things to remember coming off of both Resident Evil 2 and if you did play Resident Evil 7, both of those games are using RE Engine, and the thing that RE Engine kind of featured, especially with, or more specifically with Resident Evil, is that there would be battle damage that would show on the enemies and also on the player characters. So that is very important to note, because if this is just going off of past experience, you could hypothetically just shoot off that nose with a handgun or shotgun with Jill or with Carlos using his M4, and it would just come right the fuck off. So I think as far as like that is concerned, it is a very minimal complaint. And also something too to keep in mind is that Nemesis is supposed to mutate and shit, so it's like, I don't really think that like complaining about the nose does anything. Like, yeah, I'm gonna make fun of it, you know, don't get me wrong, like it looks fucking stupid, but like it's so like minimal that I'm not really gonna be focused on his nose during combat, because he's gonna want to fucking tentacle rape me. So it's like, you know, like I don't know what to say. Like it is just a fucking nose. Like, come on, bruh. Like, and I will say though, like, Overall though, as far as like the character designs go, I'm also not too concerned about like what the characters are wearing, because you have to remember too that when it came to Resident Evil 2 Remake, not only did people complain like a fucking lot when it came to the classic costumes, chances are they're probably going to be in this game as unlockables, and then also later down the line free DLC for PS1 models. But even if the PS1 models don't show up, I feel as though like the modding community on PC is going to do like a PS1 voice acting / character model mod, which that is going to be fucking hilarious for the best of reasons, but that's a whole nother subject for another day. But yeah, my initial impressions, I was not liking it, but it's kind of grown on me. The more that I think about it and the more that I look about it, I think that as far as Resident Evil 3 Remake goes, those characters will probably be fine as they are. I just think it's the strange angles that they chose of like portraying those characters on the like promotional art. Maybe that'll change in the official release or later down the line, but we're gonna have to wait and see on that one. So when it comes to Resident Evil Resistance, not a whole lot new going on with this promotional art other than the fact that there are 2 new characters and one of the monitors seems to be showing off something new, but it's really not that significant, so there's really no point in me covering it as far as like breaking it down and going on an in-depth analysis and speculating what's going to happen with it, because it's very minimal and there's not a whole lot to go off of. The only thing that I will say though, and this is only in regards to what had been leaked previously, there were some screenshots of like a gameplay trailer or something like that where they had noticed that there was a different character that hadn't been talked about. So at the moment, so far, at least based off of this promotional art, it seems as though there's going to be 6 playable survivors. There might be more as far as like that's going to be there at launch, and then also post-launch they might add in new survivors with better abilities and different perks and stuff like that. Same thing with Masterminds, because so far we've only officially seen Daniel Farburn, but then there's also Annette Birkin, who had been semi-leaked and semi-exploited based off of the beta for Project Resistance, because in the beta somebody happened to get a glitch where Annette Birkin popped up as the mastermind as opposed to Daniel. So that is something that is definitely known. So it's going to be interesting to see who else is going to be a mastermind and what other playable characters there's going to be. And I also wonder too, now that we know that Resident Evil 3 Remake is a thing, if Nemesis is going to be a usable tyrant for the mastermind, because we can use Mr. X. So, and I did also kind of speculate that it can't just be Mr. X as a usable tyrant. There has to be more than that, right? So maybe Resident Evil Resistance is meant as a companion piece to Resident Evil 3 Remake. Who knows? But like I said before, there really isn't a whole lot to talk about, so let's move on to the Resident Evil 3 Remake screenshots. So as far as this promotional art is concerned, I actually really like it. I like that they kind of pan out and show more of the city by comparison to the RE2 Remake promotional material, because at least for that, it kind of makes sense to zoom it in more since you're only really in the RPD. But in Resident Evil 3, it makes sense to pan it more out because you're supposed to be traveling throughout the city and exploring various locations like the hospital, the park, the RPD, the city hall, etc., etc. So I actually do really like this, and I do like this aesthetic that they're going for, because it seems like it's a mix between what RE2 Remake's promotional art did plus what the original Resident Evil 3 did. So I do like that small touch there. So now I just want to focus on talking about the characters. First off, Jill looks really interesting, I think, as far as like a design change is concerned. I really like the fact that they've went from like the green harness to a black harness for her holster. I like the fact that she's wearing combat gloves in this design now, and I do think that elbow sleeve looks a little bit interesting. But I do want to focus on specific points of the character design in this particular artwork, just because, for one, It doesn't seem like Jill is using her samurai edge. Instead, she's using some form of Glock. Also, it's very hard to notice, but if you look at her belt, she has a health spray attached to the back portion of the belt, and on the front portion there is her RPD badge, which I find very interesting about that. Considering the fact that in the original RE3, Jill and the other STARS members were going undercover, basically to try to expose Umbrella, it's very interesting to see that she would even still have her RPD badge on her, considering the fact that she doesn't want to be known that she's snooping around trying to figure out things about Umbrella. Although in this case it might be a little bit different because it's a remake, and maybe they might be implying that they're trying to have Jill rescue survivors and make it known that she is an officer, so she will go out of her way to help any survivors she comes across. Might be the case, might not be the case, we'll have to wait and see on that one. Also, in terms of the health spray, I think the only reason why they're doing that is because in the original RE3, you could get a health spray carrier. You could actually get 2 if you defeat Nemesis, and what those allow you to do is basically let you carry 3 health sprays in a container on 1 slot. And those are very convenient because you could technically have like 6 health sprays in 2 item slots and still have room for a lot more stuff. And this is also useful because anytime you used up a health spray and happen to pick one up on the way towards whatever point of the game that you're in, you could actually combine that 1 health spray with the container and constantly have it refilled, which is very convenient, I would say. So maybe in this case they're trying to have it more of a visual thing, so that way you could actually see it on her person as opposed to just having to constantly look at the inventory screen and just never like seeing that on her person, which I do think is a very interesting change. And perhaps it's going to be more of like a harness thing or like a clip that she just attaches those like health canisters onto. Who knows, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. As far as her using a Glock goes, I do think that it's very interesting that it's not her samurai edge, but I also think that there's a very specific reason for that. Now, in regards to the original Resident Evil 3, Jill had her samurai edge, but if you defeated Nemesis enough times, you could get weapon parts, and one of the weapon parts you could get was for a handgun. The handgun basically made a race gun. Race guns are basically made for fast firing for competitions, but you could get that in Resident Evil 3, the original. And I'm thinking maybe this is to allude that in the new Resident Evil 3 remake, you will be able to possibly defeat Nemesis, or maybe not necessarily defeat Nemesis in the sense that you will earn a reward, but perhaps you will go throughout the city and find certain gun parts and have to just craft guns and work with what you have. So maybe say you do get this Glock and you're gonna have to work with this until you get to a certain point where you will find your samurai edge, or perhaps the shotgun, for example, you're not going to be able to use it right away, so you have to just find the parts and just craft it as you go. And I kind of like that idea, but I'm not sure how to feel about that. So for now, I'll just kind of wait on that, because it could just not be the case. That could just be me having my imagination and wishful thinking, like going a mile a minute. But I do think that there is that plausible like case of like maybe they will keep that in the game and just expand on that mechanic. Perhaps certain mechanics like live selection will be dumbed down in favor of that. We'll have to wait and see on that. But I do think that it is very interesting that she no longer has the samurai edge, at least based on this particular image. Moving on, we have Carlos. And as I said before, I do like this more rugged design of Carlos. I think it just makes more sense to have him look more like a mercenary as opposed to some just pretty boy who's trying to hit on Jill. Not that I hated the original design per se, that original design was a good design, but this new design just feels like it fits more for a mercenary group. And I think it would also make sense to have this mercenary group because it is UBCS, and I think that Umbrella would not want them to go into an urban environment dressed in olive drab. Olive Drab, or OD, is more meant for, well, not urban, but woodland environments. So anywhere there where there's green, it would make sense to wear green fatigues and stuff like that. Whereas in this case, for the remake, it seems like he's wearing mostly black, and that would kind of make sense in terms of a change, because you would want to go into a very dark environment wearing black or very dark colors. And as far as like urban environment goes, that would also make sense because you're going to be running into a lot of like grays, reds, things of that nature. So design wise, that makes sense. I do also like the fact that they brought back his M4, and it seems like he may have gotten a slight change to it, and by that I mean he has a dual mag setup. So basically he has like a piece of tape or like a type of rubber band to attach one magazine to another. So as soon as he runs out of ammo in that first magazine, he just has to switch over and load in the other one that's attached to that one, which would make sense for faster reloading. And I wonder if that would be something that you could just find for like Jill and stuff like that, because maybe like faster reloading for some of the guns is like a perk or an advantage that you can get while fighting Nemesis or some of these other BOWs that we're going to come across within Raccoon City. So I do like that little like attention to detail. And then of course we have Nemesis himself. Now Nemesis, obviously I've already talked about the nose, but there are some very interesting aspects. This is just the main picture, of course. There is also the Biohazard Remake 3 image where we get a side view. I want to focus on this main image first though, and so far we can see that he has like these caution stickers on his person. Now I'm not sure if he's going to have the leather jacket that he had in the original. Probably not, but I am assuming that this like caution thing and this like weird looking tube that I'm not a huge fan of, but I kind of have some speculation on. I think this is more so alluding to the fact that Nemesis initially might be in mostly like a straitjacket of sorts. I think they're gonna have him kind of locked up and just have him attack you with his body and his legs as opposed to using his arms. And that would kind of make sense because Nemesis is a very brutal tyrant. So having him locked up and restrained would make sense if they're trying to transport him from place to place. So given the fact that he might be in this like straitjacket thing, this huge like tube thing might be just like the main like locking portion, and also partially a cover to his heart, because technically speaking a lot of the tyrants did have their hearts exposed, so that would kind of make sense in a lore perspective. But also too, I think that from a gameplay standpoint, if we really think about this, if we were to maybe shoot parts of the body kind of similarly to how Mr. X, if you shot off his cap, it would fall off and it would just stay off. So what if they expanded that mechanic and say you shot off that like tube lock thingy? Okay, you shot that off, but now you just made Nemesis a much harder threat because you unlocked his restraints, and now he's able to use his arms, he's able to attack you in more versatile ways. He's going to become more of a challenge. So I think there is this very, very likely possibility that they want to make Nemesis even harder than he was in the original, and I'm all for this. I want this game to be as hard as possible, and I am all for Nemesis being like the most badass tyrant like in the entire franchise, like hands down. I want to see this happen. And granted, I have this bias for Resident Evil 3 because it is my favorite game in the franchise, but if this remake tries to live up to the original and then even exceed it in some ways in terms of difficulty, then I'm just gonna like make this probably one of my new favorites in the franchise, because like I just think it's gonna be great. So that's gonna be something to talk about, of course, when we actually have more details on the game, of course. But I do want to move on to the other image so that way we can get a better look of Nemesis, because we kind of get a side view and we kind of get a look at what I was sort of referring to in that regard. So here we get that side view of Nemesis, and again, kind of similarly to Jill, where we don't really get to see all of that character render, or even Carlos, where we don't really get to see all of that character render. We don't really get to see a whole lot of Nemesis, but right towards the very bottom, it's very hard to tell because it's somewhat faded to black. You can kind of see what looks like padlocking in between this tube. And in between this tube, it seems like there's like parts where these locks would attach to, and those are like bolted down to the actual like piping of, I would assume that's his like tentacles or those bioorganic tubes that he had in the original. So whatever that may be, it seems like that is meant to basically keep him like locked down. And I'm assuming, again, this is just speculation, not sure if this is going to be legit, might not be the case, but I would not put it past them as far as expanding on this particular mechanic where Nemesis is potentially in a straitjacket, and the more you fight him and the more damage you deal to him, it would technically be ill-advised. But if you want to challenge yourself, you could hypothetically shoot these things off, and then he would reveal like parts of his body, or he would start mutating because his restraints have been taken off and he's been dealt some damage throughout the game. So this is something to probably keep an eye out on until an official trailer is shown where we get a good look of Nemesis to see how he's actually going to look like as far as a full body perspective, and maybe even a character render of Nemesis would be probably very helpful as far as like getting just a good idea of how he's going to look like and if he's going to be chained up or locked up as far as like what he's able to do prior to mutating and stuff like that. So just some final thoughts that I want to share, and this is just on the gameplay and story concerns that I have for this particular remake. Resident Evil 3 is a game that is very choice reliant, and what I mean by that is whether it is life selection or just the choice of taking a different path than you normally would, every little thing matters in that game as far as choice is concerned. So it would be very disappointing to see some of that stuff go, but it would also be very understandable as to why they would do it, because some corners might have to be cut to deliver an overall good experience. Granted, if the experience is squandered because they wanted to focus on other aspects and we're not consistent in terms of like story and just overall enjoyment of the game, then I could understand where complaints would be coming from. But that's going to be something that we'll have to wait and see on. Granted, that all said, if they do manage to get like multiple scenarios through, and if they happen to find a way to make life selection work, that'd be really cool. But I don't think they will. I think that what they're going to do is they're going to make a scenario that it's just the singular scenario. It's going to be the most canonical scenario based off of the most canonical choices in the original Resident Evil 3. And it's just going to be a linear experience like that, and you will just experience the same story every time you play the game. It will be disappointing for me in that regard, but at the same time, if the story in the remake is good, then I could maybe let it slide on top of whether or not the gameplay is good, because that's another thing that is also concerning. In my opinion, Resident Evil 3 had the best gameplay of the classic Resident Evil games. I think a close second for me would be Resident Evil Remake, but the only reason why it's a close second is because of the fact that it's lacking certain aspects like life selection, and also another one, the gunpowder mechanic. I still don't think any game is going to get as good as the original Resident Evil 3's gunpowder mechanic, but that could change with this remake. You know, they could actually bring that back and have a more streamlined version of that, where you can actually still make enhanced ammo. That's something I still fault Resident Evil 2 Remake for, but having enhanced ammo and having different grenade launcher types and stuff, things of that nature, I think would be more ideal. But it's gonna have to be like a wait and see scenario, just like with waiting and seeing how the story is gonna turn out and waiting to see how the characters are portrayed and stuff like that. A lot of this is wait and see. So in that regard, I think the best thing to do is to just focus on what information we're going to be given, because I think the rumor is right now that it might be announced at State of Play or during PlayStation's State of Play on December 10th, which is only like 4 days away from the recording that I'm doing today. So that's going to be something that we're just going to have to take each piece of information, gather all the information we can based off of developer statements, trailers, interviews, things of that nature, and just hope for the best. I'm not saying that this game is going to be bad. I don't want to make it seem like, oh, this game is going to be bad because it doesn't have live selection, or it doesn't have Julia Voth, or it doesn't have the gunpowder mechanic that I want, or it doesn't have the gun crafting mechanic from the original and stuff like that. My biggest concern is if the gameplay is fun, is the story consistent and good as a remake, is the game as a remake good on its own, like on its own as its own standalone experience, is it a good remake? And does it hold up to the original Resident Evil 3? Those are like some big concerns that I have, and that's probably not going to be answered until I get more information, and that's the same thing that I would advise for all of you. While a lot of this stuff, if you're going in with a reasonable mindset, can be concerning, because we don't know what this gameplay is going to be like. We can only assume that it's going to be very similar to Resident Evil 2 remakes. One can only assume what will happen to the gameplay, but not really know until we actually have visuals, actually get the chance to test it out via demos, and maybe even play the full game to make a full assessment as to whether or not the concerns were justified, or maybe there was really nothing to be concerned about to begin with. That all said, granted, I had those concerns. That's only because Resident Evil 3 is my favorite Resident Evil, but overall I would just want this great experience, and I'm going to play this game regardless. I am very much looking forward to seeing what this game is going to be like and getting the chance to try it out, and hopefully they'll release a demo that isn't timed and stuff like that. But as far as that goes, it's going to be, and I have to keep stressing this, wait and see. And this is going to be the case for a lot of things like this. It's just, we have to wait and see, and we have to see if the overall quality of this product is going to live up to, I would say, reasonable expectations. Because if I say expectations, I think the problem with that is you're going to have purist expectations, and purist expectations are, it needs to be fixed camera angles, it needs to have Julia Voth, it needs to have certain aspects, it needs to be a one-for-one remake like the original, and it needs to be similar to Resident Evil remake, where it's still the same game but 70% of it is different. And I don't want to go into this remake expecting it to be like the original. I want to go into it as if it were a standalone experience and judge it based on those merits. So while there are going to be things that I would like to see in this remake, ultimately the best thing to do is to just go into it with as little expectations as possible, because then you can't really be disappointed per se. And you can always look at it as a standalone experience, or even as a own unique retelling or reimagining of things that came from Capcom's past. So I guess what I'm trying to say is just be reasonable about it. Have your concerns. I'm definitely having my concerns, of course, and I'm definitely going to be critical of this game just because Resident Evil 3 is my personal favorite, and I can't say that enough. Go into it just like me. Just go into it with very reasonable expectations and just view it as a standalone experience. That's the best way I can go about it, because once we start delving into very specific details, then I think people kind of just get blinded by nostalgia, and that's never really a good thing. It's just not. Just avoid that. Just whatever you do, just avoid getting into that sort of territory.
That taken into consideration, I would recommend checking out Renegade Operative's videos on the subject matter. He did talk about the basic information of it, and then also the information, or rumor rather I should say, about it showing up at State of Play. Those will be linked down in the description below, as well as at the end of the title card. So definitely go ahead, check those out, tell them I sent you, And really, that's all I have to say. My biggest hope is that we get to see it as soon as possible, but without having the game like come out as soon as possible. I would rather them take their time and develop a solid title, but we'll have to wait and see on a release date as well. I can't stress that enough, that we have to just wait and see. But, you know, it is what it is. That's kind of what happens when you don't have a whole lot of information to go off of, but just screenshots. So, hey. But anyway, hope you all enjoyed the video. And with that, if you did, feel free to give it a like, maybe share it. Feel free to maybe even subscribe if you're new to the channel. And also feel free to follow me on places like Twitter and on Twitch. And that is pretty much everything I have to say. So I will see you all in the next one. Matane.